Leslie, thank you for being here. Charles, Sheldon, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys.
Hi, thank you very much, Jordan. Uh, Dr. Lewis, welcome to our program. This is the first in a series of interviews we're doing with Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidates, and we're very interested in your position, particularly on firearms rights issues. So we're very, very glad to have you here today. As you've said, you want to use common sense to make our laws. So we're very interested in finding out what that means, and we want to hear a bit about yourself. And I'll turn it over to Charles. We've got a pretty brief agenda. We want to take about 30 minutes for this discussion. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Very good.
Charlie?
Well, welcome, Leslyn. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Yes. Hopefully you're coping well with this situation that's out there and you're being safe.
Yes, we're doing our best.
Very good. Okay. So just for the audience sake, Leslyn and I, we formally met, I think it was back in February, I think it was in Burlington, and we had quite the nice discussion in Burlington about gun control reform. And, I found the good doctor very interested in what we had to say and was very interested in learning more about the situation. She revealed to me that she's not a gunny per se. She doesn't have her license, although she is working on her license. I have actually put in a little call to someplace where she can get that going after this virus pandemic thing is over, so she can get that going. But, we talked about some basic things. It was very early in the campaign. Of course, we have more information on hand now. She was the first to do the NFA survey, and I thank you very much for doing that.
I actually did that without the approval of my campaign manager. I sent it. I didn't want to miss the deadline. So
right, and you were one of the first ones to put it in there, and you met the deadline. So once again, I thank you for that. So without further ado, basically the agenda is that we're going to be speaking to those NFA survey questions and your answers. I leave it up to you in terms of which ones you want to start with. I'm hoping that we get through them all, but if we don't, that's fine too. So, Sheldon, I'll punt it back to you. We can begin the dialogue on the questions.
That sounds great. Well, Leslyn and I also met recently in Calgary. We were both there at the Take Back City Hall meetings, and we only spoke very briefly, but we were both speakers at that particular meeting, and it was quite an interesting event. We saw some very strong sentiments from the people in Alberta, and I was a little surprised that some comments about Canadian nationalism were not received very well, but nonetheless, we'll have to deal with that as it comes up. So our first question that we have, you answered this in your survey, was about the removal of non-victim, non-violent firearms offenses from the criminal code. And this has to do with, as you have a law background, you're a lawyer, as well as having a PhD. What do you understand that meaning, and how do you see that as an important aspect of Conservative Party policy going forward?
Well, in the criminal justice system, we don't punish victimless crime. In this case, if there's no victim and there's no violence, then I don't see the commission of a crime. And so I believe that law-abiding gun owners should be able to use and own their firearms if they can do so in a safe manner, and they should be able to enjoy their property without harassment.
Excellent.
Very good.
One of the elements of the non-violent offenses is that it's under Section 91 and Section 92 of the Criminal Code. If you do not have a license, you're committing an offense, and so therefore, having a license is a defense to a criminal charge. It's an administrative law that really probably shouldn't be in the Criminal Code, and that's one of the aspects of this question that we're very interested in.
Yeah, I think that sections like that have to be completely reviewed. And so we have to look at the utility of the section. And that's something that I'm prepared to do with respect to the entire firearms regulations, to look at them and see whether or not they're meeting the objective that they set out to meet.
Excellent.
Excellent. Now, Our second question is, do you support a repeal of firearms legislation which has not provided any evidence of benefit to public safety? Now, this includes a lot of legislation over many years, none of which has been able to meet the test of being able to provide any protection to public safety. It's largely been due to knee-jerk reactions either in the United States or domestically. Basically, legislation makes a very bad memorial, and we tend to react to bad events by creating legislation. These include things like Bill C-71 from 2019, some aspects of C-42 from 2015, the infamous Bill C-68, which created the firearms license, and among other things. Kim Campbell's Bill C-17, which banned and prohibited many firearms and really ramped up the classification system, as well as C-51 from 1977, which also created a lot of prohibitions in the classification system. So you've said that you definitely would support a review of this and repeal of it. A lot of these things prevent firearms owners from being able to transfer and own and use their property. So I'm interested in your comments on that.
Well, I've had lots of discussions with people, firearms owners from all over the country. And what I have gathered from those discussions is that there's a lot of frustration, and they feel frustrated because they believe that they're being treated as criminals. And in one respect, I have to agree with them because they are. Because if you look at the intent of firearms laws, it's not to protect people against criminals because criminals don't follow the law. It's really to control law-abiding citizens. And so I think that we have to make sure that when we are dealing with individuals' rights to property, that the least limitation is put on that. And so I am very receptive to reviewing all of the laws to make sure that the lesser infringement is being placed upon law-abiding citizens. And I want to make sure that in doing that, that we always consider the safety of all Canadians. And of course, the safety comes first. That's our primary issue. And as such, as Prime Minister, I think that what we would do in order to balance the rights of law-abiding citizens who are firearms owners with public safety is to conduct a full review of all the firearms laws to make sure that they meet the public safety objective.
Very good.
Very good.
Yep. Actually, I just would like to interject there a little bit, and we talked about this at our meeting. This has been the bane of our existence, so to speak, for firearms owners for many years now, decades now. And what's happening is that there's all these little tripwires out there, and law-abiding firearms owners are trying to be law-abiding, and things, of course, are being always pushed away through them. We have to go through other hoops to get things done, but inadvertently, people get caught up in the system, right? And it's important to note that this injustice that is happening right now with these standing laws entraps a lot of innocent people. They go through the judicial system. They spend lots of money on making themselves for defense and everything else, and they're found innocent at the end, but are still punished anyway. So this is an ongoing process. It's not something that happens one-off. It's happening regularly. We don't see it on the radar, and I think that's by design as well too, to not alarm people. And I guess what we're looking for from the future Prime Minister of Canada is, substantive movement on this so that we do have justice for these people that are being unjustly treated.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, our third question is, do you support a complete review of the Firearms Act and related regulations with a view to protecting the right of firearms to enjoy the use of their property? And I think part of the aspect here is there's really three failed aspects to the firearms control system that really provide no benefit to public safety. First of all is the requirement of firearms owners to have a license. This is something that was brought about by liberal gun control in 1995 with Bill C-68. The second thing is the classification system, which prevented people from transferring some of their legitimately acquired firearms property because of characteristics put onto these that some said, well, people should not own this particular firearm or that particular firearm. And then the third thing, of course, is the registration of firearm, which in every case around the world has only ever been used to create lists of firearms for confiscation at a time when that has been deemed to be unpalatable. So I'd like to get your comments on that, Dr. Lewis.
Sure. I think that in addition to public safety, I believe that firearms laws should be reviewed to ensure that gun owners enjoy the right to private property, and that I believe that this right is an unfettered right, and that it should not be fettered by any government intervention or by the courts. Um, and of course, those rights are limited to ensuring that firearms owners are law-abiding citizens and are acting in manners that are safe, and making sure that they are responsible with their firearms. So I think that we are wasting money and on issues on and programs like buyback programs and other initiatives. I would like to see in other initiatives like guns and gangs that really deal with the issue of crime instead of focusing on law-abiding citizens. And I believe that these types of initiatives result in increased safety. I think that we should, direct some of the money that we are focusing on, and actually all of the money that we're focusing on gun buyback programs, and direct those to local precincts to deal with crime control issues, and to equip police officers to deal with community issues, and to assist communities that are in need.
Very good.
Certainly allocating budgetary resources towards programs that actually do benefit Canadians as a whole is a much better thing to do than create a large wasteful bureaucracy that merely tries to enumerate property and place restrictions on its use and enjoyment. So yes, we're quite in agreement with you on that.
Can I just jump in too? I think we talked about this at our meeting too, Leslyn, that in Toronto, I think it was in the fall, the mayor asked for some support from the Liberal government, and they were given some millions to try a pilot project, and it was very successful. And what they did with the millions of dollars that they got was to bolster their parole system. So they know who these criminals are. They're going through a revolving door. The good police out there are risking their lives to get these armed thugs off the street. They go before the court. Some of these magistrates, unfortunately, are very lenient, allow them to go out, and of course they go back into their trade, which is crime, get another illegal gun, and the process continues. What they did, though, and I think this is what you were alluding to, was to focus on those people, and this is what they did. They hired more people who were actually surveilling these people, and they took quite a few illegal firearms off the market by doing that within the month. And there's a great solution right there, and you've tapped into that perfectly.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very important to make sure that the law enforcement officers are equipped and have the resources to deal with this. Because if we're dealing with the issue of public safety, then it's counterintuitive to focus on law-abiding people. We should be focusing on the people that are breaking the laws if we want to enhance public safety.
Yes, and making laws that turn otherwise law-abiding citizens into criminals through administrative acts, paperwork, and licensing makes no sense whatsoever. No. It just creates a bureaucracy. It builds a lack of respect for law and order generally, and puts people into boxes where they find themselves unable or unwilling to comply with administrative legal structures. Our next question is about the elimination of the firearms classification system. And this is probably, in some respects, a thorny question, because what this classification system has met, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, is that it limits the ability of firearms owners to freely use, to buy, sell, trade, inherit, and pass on to their heirs all of their firearms property. For example, one of the categories is 12.6, which includes small handguns or specified calibers of 25 ACP or 32 ACP as being prohibited handguns, which means that the trade in these is quite limited. Now, I had my daughters out shooting on the weekend, and I took some 12.6 handguns with me. And the thing that I found really interesting is that they were much more comfortable in learning how to shoot properly with these smaller framed pistols than they were with a larger framed pistol that they couldn't hold safely. So these types of things are really much more helpful for getting people involved in the shooting sports and personal enjoyment. Uh, but at the same time, there are the ability to pass these on is quite limited. You can pass them on to your heirs, but you can't say buy and sell them to other parties. If you're not in that particular category, you're not allowed to join into it, which effectively steals the value for many people. And that's the same with other categories. For example, those who collect a full auto. We used to have full auto shoots in southern Alberta back in the 60s and 70s, and those were gotten rid of because they said, well, you can't take these out shooting anymore. It's not that anyone was engaging in criminal activity. It's just that they were prevented from enjoying their property or from selling them. And then they created a category called converted auto, which they said, well, this will be non-restricted. And what you do is you convert your full auto firearms to that they fire in a semi-automatic way, and then you can have them. And then they later converted those to prohibited as well. So the classification is really about theft of property. So what are your comments on that regard, Leslyn?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm still learning the intricacies of all the different classifications, and it's quite confusing, to be honest, and it'll probably take me some time to understand it. But I would think that a review to examine the entire classification system would probably be something that's warranted. And I think that based on what I've seen, I would like to understand the difference between the classifications for functionality and utility rather than appearance. And that's something that I could not really decipher, whether or not the classification was based upon the function and utility of the weapon or of the firearm, or whether it was based upon appearance. And so I think that needs to be clarified for the average person to understand what it is that the law is attempting to classify. In addition, I also had some concerns about the UN marking and whether or not that's even necessary, because my understanding is that firearms can be traced in any event by the country of origin and the year of manufacture. And so my question is whether or not the UN marking program is even necessary, because based on my limited understanding, is that all firearms have a serial number that's necessary for warranty purposes. So is the UN marking regulations, is that even necessary? And so that is something I'd like to also explore.
Well, thank you for that, Leslyn. As you may know, the NFA has been very active at the United Nations and has been instrumental in helping get the UN marking regulations delayed a number of times by lobbying for that particular purpose. We agree with you that we don't see those regulations as particularly useful. And in fact, what they actually would do is increase the cost to the end users. This is what it would do. The United Nations initiatives in this regard seem to be completely unhelpful and almost make work projects in many respects. So I guess the next question is about property rights. This should be a pretty easy question for anyone running as a conservative. But do you support the entrenchment of property rights in Canadian law? This really goes to the heart of a lot of issues around firearms ownership, but it's been one of those long controversial issues that goes back to the days of Deef the Chief and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's implicitly there, but I think your question is basically asking if I support an explicit inclusion of property rights in a constitutional context. I believe that's what you're asking. And
that's so, sure.
Yeah, okay. So I do support all property rights being entrenched in our Constitution, and security of our persons also being entrenched in our laws.
Okay. Well, security of person is already in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but
yes.
We also have the pre-existing rights that existed before. As you're aware, I not want to give a legal lecture or anything, but our legal tradition is one based on precedent. We also have some influence from the French style of law as well, not just common law, but also the French Civil Code and the Code Napoleon in our laws. But we didn't choose to write everything down because rights were well known. And the American Republican style of writing down all the rights, in my view, tends to be very limiting. And when you start writing and codifying everything, you get that kind of issue. But the problem with not having them written down is if people don't assert those rights, they lose them over time. And we've been gradually seeing our rights erode away through subsequent decisions in court, through societal attitudes, and through a belief that if you don't have rights codified in the Constitution, they don't exist. So what are your views on that? There's a legal question for you.
Well, to be more specific, what I was referring to with security of persons is I've actually had a number of Canadians that are living out west contact me and indicate to me that they don't have they don't live in close proximity to police stations as we do, and so they see their firearms ownership as a means to protect their property. And so they're very, very concerned that, for example, if they are robbed or there's a break and entry in their property, that if they defend themselves, that they could be the ones that are criminalized. And so that's what I was referring to. And I should
of course. And the right to protect property used to be a part of our criminal code under permitting for use of a restricted firearm. That's a classification. It was one of the inclusions, but that was removed. I think in the C-51 era, they took out property as something to be protected by the use of firearms, and this has been a long erosion of these particular abilities in our law. However, we still have the ability to protect life as long as it's reasonable and necessary. But the whole question of property has become one that's very, very sticky, particularly with liberal elements that do not support the use of force for protection.
What's interesting about this is that, and this question kind of stemmed from something I attended a couple months back. It was a Preston Manning meet and greet, and of course we know that he's a staunch conservative and feels strongly about the Constitution and property rights. And I posed the question to him about firearms, and his retort basically was that the stars have basically aligned at this point in time. We, despite having a liberal minority, which probably won't last, and we'll probably have a conservative PM shortly in the near future, we also have a lot of conservative provincial premiers out there that are also of like mind. And of course, we need the collaboration of all the premiers to make something like this happen in the Constitution. So this is a window of opportunity, I think, for us and for all Canadians who value their private property to entrench it formally into the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, constitutional change, as we know from the debacle of the 1980s, is not easy in Canada. I think one of the great costs of the Mulroney era was the huge mess that we got mired into over trying to do constitutional issues at the expense of everything else. But constitutional change, of course, is never easy. Now, we talked about firearms for protection as a civil right really already. I guess the next thing lesson is why don't you tell us about yourself and why you should be the Prime Minister of Canada?
Well, I can tell you why I'm running. I'm running because I see that the direction of the country has changed somewhat, and I would like to redirect the focus of the nation. And I would like to focus on things that I believe are being undermined and eroded, like fundamental freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of conscience. All of these rights, I believe, are being eroded. There are also a number of other rights that I believe that are being undermined, such as parental rights. I also believe that we have moved away from, strong economies and security. And so I think that those are issues that we really, really need to focus on. I also feel that we should be more compassionate and look to take care of our seniors and our veterans. And these are issues that I don't believe are being dealt with in an appropriate manner.
Well, as a veteran myself, I appreciate those comments. I had reserve service teaching cadets, but it's certainly very important to see the needs of our various communities within Canada being addressed at a leadership conference like this. Now, I think it's important for people to understand that if they want to be able to be involved in the leadership process in deciding who is going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, you have to actually be a member of the Conservative Party to vote. Now, there's a deadline coming up for that, I believe, or it's near, but people should definitely join. Go ahead, Leslyn.
17th is the deadline that you have to become a member by May 17th in order to vote.
Okay, so May 17th is that critical deadline, so people have some time. And if they want to support you or any of the other leadership candidates, they should definitely take out a Conservative Party membership. I think it costs about $10 a year or something like that.
That's correct.
And
it moved to 15.
Pardon me?
It's $15 now.
Oh, 15. So we've had a bit of an inflation. I guess it's the drop in the Canadian dollar due to certain policies. But sure. So $15 a year, Conservative Party membership. They can do this online at the Conservative Party site, or they can join at their local EDA. And I think that's a very important thing to do. Do you have any other closing comments you'd like to make before we finish for the day, Leslyn?
Well, I just want to say that I think it's very important that law-abiding citizens feel that their rights are respected in this country. And, I was very surprised to hear from so many firearms owners as to how they felt that they were being harassed and how they felt that their property rights were just not being respected. And they're very passionate about that. They're very passionate about our civil liberties. They're very passionate about the rule of law and safety and security. And so I think that we really need to all come to the table and figure out what we're going to do about these laws and review them to make sure that they are meeting the objective of public safety.
Amen. Fantastic. Well, Leslyn, thank you so much for sharing some of your valuable time with us today to discuss these important issues. And I want to encourage our viewers out there to stay tuned to NFATalk for interviews and discussions with other of the Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidates. Thanks again, everyone. Charles and Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you.